Well, I'm Dr. David Johnson, Professor of Medicine and Chief of Gastroenterology at Eastern Virginia Medical School in Norfolk, Virginia, and welcome back to part 3, the finale, if you will, of my highlight suggestions from Digestive Disease Week 2024 held in Washington, D.C. I'll refer you back to part 1 and part 2 where I've done similar analyses. But let's get to the finale and a couple of noteworthy abstracts and presentations that I think will really catch your attention. First is colon cancer in younger patients. This was a really alarming study. That was an analysis using a 20-year database from the Centers for Disease Control and looking specifically capturing 3 million colon cancers in the United States. Virtually all the cancers are reported. And the increase in patients under 45 was significant. 333% increase in teens, age 15 to 19, 185% in those from 20 to 24, and 45% from 40 to 44. The incident rate in this latter group is 21.2 per 100,000. What does this mean? Well, it means colon cancer is not and should not be considered a disease restricted to the elderly population. It's important that the public needs to be aware of this, and certainly the signs and symptoms of colon cancer in the younger population, particularly bleeding, should be a discriminant alarm sign, and it certainly needs to be evaluated. Age is not a protector. A couple of things that caught my eye as it relates to newer imaging as it relates to the brain and the involvement in the brain-gut axis. MRIs were used in 2 different evaluations. One that was looking at the involvement of Crohn's disease, active and inactive disease, using MRI, and brain gray matter volume was assessed, and demonstrably different between the patients that have Crohn's in remission versus active disease, and certainly from healthy controls. And along the same lines, there was one that looked at the features for functional diseases. They had a subset of Crohn's in that population as well. But the notable were functional dyspepsia and irritable bowel also included. And there were significant differences between these groups, in particular certain areas that were highlighted as demonstrably different between the different pathways for functional diseases and inflammatory diseases. So again, what we're seeing here is newer assessments of what we call the brain-gut axis, providing insight into the certainly the neurologic basis, if not just the involvement of these conditions, and something that really, for functional diseases, we can see changes in the brain evident. So it's not just something that patients can be construed as it's just in your head. It really is in your head, and it is in your gut. We see biomic changes as well. Speaking of the brain, the one that really caught my attention as far as a need that we were entirely missing, it's called the Innocence Study, and this is an effect of these serious adverse events that occur. Certainly we see these in endoscopy. It's part of business. But as far as interventional endoscopists, it's likely more because of the nature of their involvements. So this is a study looking at 195 participants, and they looked at the experience of psychologically impacted after a serious adverse event. It was basically 73%. Particularly these adverse events were perforation and or death. There was a significant impact as endoscopists certainly were reporting things like nightmares or physical reactions. And these are things that they then said, what about, are your centers providing any basis for support? And this was the alarm feature I found in this study. Out of all these centers, 7 centers had a program to support physicians. 120 following SAEs did not. So I think this is a call to action now. Centers need to be evaluating this, certainly to promote the mental health and well-being of these physicians that do these really critically needed procedures. Moving from the brain to the adrenal axis, this is a very provocative study by the group at Mount Sinai. And they looked at literature search and did an analysis and meta-analysis on patients that had been experiencing inflammatory bowel disease treated with oral steroids or with rectal steroids. And this is looking at the axis leading to adrenal insufficiency as measured by cortisol levels or cortisol stimulation tests. What they found in looking both at pediatrics and adult population, there was really no significant difference between the end message here. But for patients that were on oral steroids, the prevalence of adrenal insufficiency was 47%. And for patients on budesonide, it was 31.2%. And for patients on rectal steroids only, it was 5.3%. What does this mean? Well, following glucocorticoids treatments, we need to be acutely aware and chronically attuned to the fact that this occurs, adrenal insufficiency, in 1 in 3 patients. Certainly less common with rectal, but we need to be aware of it, and we need to mitigate, and certainly need to be aware to treat if appropriate. 2 more that I wanted to highlight. One was inflammatory bowel monitoring using a wearable technology. This is something that was assessing sweat as a biofluid for sampling of inflammatory markers and cytokines. They used a sweat sensing wearable device in patients with and without inflammatory bowel disease to highlight the feasibility of this measuring device, which was then uploaded by Bluetooth to a cloud server. And they drew serum levels of TNF values, TNF alpha, and there was a striking concordance as it relates to the sweat and the serum levels, demonstrably different from healthy controls. P-value is 0.0001. Again, something that may be on the horizon for a marker that we can use a wearable device to assess disease activity as it relates to certainly the cytokine expression, inflammatory bowel. One more in inflammatory bowel disease as it relates to Crohn's disease and complex fistulas. This is a long-term follow-up of a pilot study that was done assessing the use of a plasma-rich stroma solution, combination of stromal-vascular fraction and platelet-rich plasma. This is something that's a autologous procurement. The stromal-vascular fraction comes from, particularly from adipose, can also come from bone marrow, but certainly with the abundance of adipose, it's easy to harvest. Nonetheless, the studies had been done, particularly in the Netherlands, and this is a long-term follow-up on 1-year data that they published in 2023 now. Mean follow-up at 3.7 years. They found that compared to all these patients had complete treatment with curettage, the standard treatment for fistula, and the majority of them were on biologics. 67% were on biologics, but complete closure and the longitudinal analysis was reached in 88%. I've never seen a complete closure like that before. Radiologic complete closure, 75%, and partial closure in 100%. So exciting, extremely exciting technology. Future randomized research is warranted to look at this and potentially further expand the understanding of how this can be a demonstrably efficacious treatment for a very complex patient population. That concludes 2024 DDW. I'm Dr. David Johnson. Thanks again for listening.